I had found some cheap train tickets to Luxembourg, and being the adventurous person I am, I decided last minute to book them and go all by myself. Due to some unfortunate, lack of planning on my part, circumstances, I ended up on that train to Luxembourg with nothing to wear for the weekend, except the clothes on my back. I figured it wasn't a big deal. How boring it would be to have everything go according to plan for once. But anyways, Luxembourg City is quite small, and after 2 days, I had pretty much seen all of what I wanted to see. A quick Google search showed me that there was a beautiful forest some kilometers north of the city. I thought that it looked perfect, so I bought a day train pass and set out on my journey. I managed to make it there, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I wasn't really dressed for hiking since I had no clothes or shoes with me at the time, but I didn't want to miss out on such an amazing experience, so I ventured into the forest anyways. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt and ballet flats for shoes. I told myself that I would stay close to the area where the buses and cars park, and not to do any crazy rock climbing or anything, and nothing would go wrong. Boy, was that a dumb assumption to make. I was about 45 minutes away from where I started walking. There was no one else around. I walk along a sharp turn and there's a lady heading towards me. She was around 45 or so, seemed quite plain. As we approached each other, she suddenly says, "That's not okay." I ignore this as I try to ignore people on the street as much as I can, and I keep walking. She has reached the point of being right next to me now, and as she passes, she says, "You can't do this." There is no one else around, so she had to be talking to me. I reluctantly turn towards her and ask, "Pardon me?" She says, "How dare you show up here like this?" I'm thinking that she has me confused with someone else, and I try to tell her that she's got the wrong person, and slowly keep walking. But she turns towards me and says, "This forest is sacred. You can't come in here wearing shoes like that." At this point, I'm stopped staring at this woman, confused as hell. I offer an apology and I keep going, but she follows me. She says, "You don't understand. You're ruining it." I say nothing. What the hell am I supposed to say? I see some big branches close by that I could maybe use as a weapon, if I had to. I don't even know what's going on at this point. She was screaming now, repeating, "It is sacred and my shoes are ruining the sacredness of the forest." But I stand my ground and offer one more apology. She tells me that I'm going to regret it. I don't know why, but I told her that I had nothing else to wear, trying to justify myself, I guess. And then she tells me that it doesn't matter. I'm starting to feel relieved. Maybe she'll leave me alone now. She says, "The forest is protected. Do you know who protects it?" I respond, "No." Realistically, where could I run? Nowhere. Who could I call? No one. So I have to face this lady at all times, and I don't want her attacking me from behind or something. She proceeds to tell me that Jesus Christ himself is protecting the forest. I nod. Sounds about right. She repeats that it doesn't matter to her anymore that I'm wearing ballet flats. She then says that Jesus and God know, since she told them. She tells me that God will not let me leave the forest. I say something along the lines of, "Pardon?" And she tells me slowly that God knows I have forsaken this forest and that I'm a traitor and a sinner. She tells me that I'm not going to make it out of this forest. "You will never leave. God won't let you. He sees you here, ruining the sacredness of the forest. He sent me to find you. You had your chance. He will give you the punishment that you deserve." I nod. I'm kind of scared, but at least she has left it up to God to punish me, so I should be okay. I just need her to walk away. We hold eye contact for about 45 seconds, and then she turns and continues on. I stay where I am, slowly back up into a tree and wait while I watch her leave. I was afraid that she had some nearby friends, so I wanted my back up to something. It made me feel safer. She was still within earshot, and she said, "He won't let you know. Nothing you can do will change you." She kept walking and never turned back. I waited 15 minutes and with my back on the tree, and then slowly kept going. I never saw her again, thank God. A long-time lurker, so I figured I would share my story. I was living in Tbilisi a few years ago, the capital of the Republic of Georgia, running a kind of legally ambiguous consumer credit operation, when I figured it was time I took a much-needed weekend getaway in a nearby small town. The town that I settled on is an extremely popular tourist location, given its beautiful location along a river nestled in a deep valley, and rife with ancient churches. With many options for potential guest houses, hotels and rentals, I decided to not to book in advance, and to just trapeze around until I found something appropriate. I found a very adequate guest house perched on a hill with about a 1-acre plot. Upon entering the guest house, I was greeted in typical Georgian fashion by an incredibly hospitable woman, in her 60s between 90s, and her son who was in his early 30s who resumed his yard work of filling a large holy set with a septic tank with a foul-ingrained smell after a brief introduction. Again, in typical Georgian fashion, the hostess offered me tea, homemade wine, bread and cheese, all of which were much needed and fantastic. I'm an American, but my family came from Eastern Europe, so I speak Russian. As most Georgians do, so we were able to chat a lot. Our conversation progressed from basic get-to-know-you bits to more personal information, like whether I'm seeing anyone or who I'm dating, which does come up in surprising frequency when you meet sweet grandmothers who want you to meet their granddaughters. At the time, I was dating a fellow expat from a Western European country. When I told the hostess that I was seeing someone, she seemed thrilled and asked me to show her a photo. She reacted with an "ah" and nodded in approval, commenting on her physique in a way that would probably be inappropriate if it wasn't a cute old grandma. I was then pressed by the hostess as to why I didn't invite her, and how that it isn't what a good boyfriend would do. But on the spot like this, I lied and said that she was very busy with a work project. She wasn't, but would be arriving later in the evening, and didn't ask. The hostess was elated by this news and called over her son and asked me to show the photo of the girl that I was seeing. Early in our conversation, it was established that I do not speak in Georgian. The son saw the photo and affirmatively nodded and spoke in Georgian to the hostess, and then turned to me with a beaming smile and a thumbs up and said in English, "Very pretty, your lucky brother." He then in Russian asked if I'd texted her to invite her. I lied and said that I did text her, and reiterated that she would be arriving in a few hours. It was around 4 p.m. at the time in a beautiful golden hour glow that lit up the surrounding mountains and valley. The son said that he'll join us and asked if I liked cha-cha. Cha-cha is a very strong national liquor of Georgia, ranging from 30 to 75% alcohol content and made from distilled grapes. I'd become quite the savant of cha-cha, and despite some strange feelings about their fixation on the female visitor, I obliged. Cha-cha is not for the weak-hearted, but I was very used to consuming it at the time. I should have paid more notice to the very intentional placement of these shots that he filled for us, but I pushed those misgivings aside and had the shot after a very traditional toast. Around 20 minutes later, I felt exhausted and ill and excused myself to my room, saying that I needed a quick nap. Walking to my room, I knew something was amiss. As mentioned in the beginning, I was fronting a questionable business and I did have a firearm in my bag, and I made a mental note to take it and put it under my pillow. But as one can imagine, it isn't easy to remember things even on a short term when apparently drugged. Despite failing to collect my weapon, I did close my blinds as the afternoon sun was blaring into the room, and I wanted darkness. Passing out at around 4:30 p.m., I awoke to darkness at 4:45 a.m. with a raging headache. My window shades were partially opened, despite me closing them before passing out. They were opened with about 2 feet of space visible to the outside. My bags were not at the position that I had left them, and the television was on, and on high volume despite me never using it, and the door was only partially closed. I peered out the window and didn't see anything, so I quickly went to my bag, retrieved my firearm, and went to the bathroom, with the intention of calling my coworkers or a driver to pick me up. I had no cell service and no Wi-Fi, despite having perfectly fine reception the day prior. I went back to bed with the weapon under the pillow, with zero desire for inclination to fall back asleep. After an hour or so pretending to be asleep, I saw the sun peer through the window to get a look inside. At this point, I was certain it was not my imagination playing tricks on me, and that I was in trouble. I came out around sunrise to find both the hostess and her son sipping tea on the deck, and told the hostess that my girlfriend was arriving soon on a bus, and that I would bring her when it arrived. I grabbed my backpack and left my other bag to give the impression that I wasn't fleeing. I got service immediately after leaving the property, and called a partner to come pick me up. An old-school businessman who was floating the money that I had run the lending operation. With that, I told him the story, and he said that he would handle it. He did handle it. I still think about the foul-smelling hole that the son was digging. The last guess, maybe. Weeks later, I decided that wasn't the place or business for me, and applied to law school on the other side of the world. When I was a little girl, I lived in an apartment complex with my mother. The entire complex consists of 2 buildings that sat side by side, less than 100 feet apart, with 4 2-bedroom flats upstairs and 2 downstairs. We lived downhill about 100 yards from a major 5-lane road, but you would never know due to the thick woods that bordered the complex on 3 sides. The last side was an area cut for power lines that ran next to our driveway, with a graveyard directly behind it. It should go without saying that this setup was a recipe for many childish shenanigans as well as creepy encounters. On the front side of the complex and along the power line side were thick blackberry brambles. They weren't quite as thick along the power line area, but in front of the apartment, you couldn't stick your arm in without being torn apart by the thorns, and it was so thick that it was nearly impossible to push through. This is relevant later. I was the only young child that lived there full time, and all the neighbors were, to the best of my knowledge, fond of me. I was active in Girl Scouts, so when it was time to go around to all the neighbors for orders, then when they came in, I would get my little wagon and deliver them. Because my mother knew and trusted all of the neighbors, I would do this myself. The day this happened, I had taken my wagon to the other building to deliver cookies to some of my mother's friends and was walking back. I hadn't meant to stay as long as I did, but they had an aquarium that was fascinating to me. That day, my mother's friend's husband had bought some new fish, so I had spent about 45 minutes helping them pick out names. So when I began to walk back, dusk had fallen. I had walked about 7 steps off their porch when I got a bad feeling. Now, I understand that I'm an empath, and I have learned to listen to my intuition, but back then, I just thought that I had to poo bad. I stopped for a second to settle my stomach and I heard a noise. When I looked to the front of the apartment, where the blackberries were the most thick, initially I couldn't see anything and I wanted to say he had flicked a lighter or something, almost like he was trying to purposely alert me of his presence. The second that I saw him, I froze. He had shoulder-length, stringy black hair, bad skin and looked like a skeleton, he was so skinny. Knowing what I know now, I imagine that he was probably strung out. I realized when he knew that I saw him because his face split into a wicked, not at all friendly grin. Then he began tearing his way through the blackberry brambles towards me. I began running towards my house while screaming bloody murder as I heard his feet slap the pavement behind me. I got to my steps and my Uncle Mike, who lived next door, flung his door open to see what the heck was going on, but the man had disappeared. I began screaming and crying about the man that had chased me out of the woods, because Mike hadn't seen him. Initially, he had thought that I let my imagination run away with me, but when he looked at the area I said that he had emerged from, there was a clear path and blood from where he had been cut by the thorns. After they took their machete to cut away the brambles and investigate where he had came from, they discovered a small area he had been standing in, with a small pile of cigarette butts like he had stood there waiting for me when he saw me walk across initially. A few weeks later, deeper in the woods, my mother's boyfriend and I discovered a small tent with assorted, inappropriate paraphernalia. No one mentioned the connection, but I was very mature for my age, so when I thought about it, it disturbed me very much. So, disturbing stranger that departed your tent to watch me from the woods. Let's not meet again. I'm a university student now, but this incident happened when I was in 8th grade. When I was around 14, I studied a subject focusing on outdoor pursuits. For our final assessment, 2 teachers took my class on a one-night camp where we would do activities like rock climbing, kayaking, trail walking, and so on. I live in Australia, around an hour from a state forest that was notorious for the backpacker murders. Several bodies had been found and several more remain missing. I'm pretty sure all of the murders were linked to the same killer. Anyway, in the morning we leave the school and drive out in a bus. When we reach the road that leads to the entrance of the forest, a police car is parked outside. He spoke to the teacher for a moment, but I didn't hear anything and no one else seemed to notice or care. Fast forward a few hours and we've tracked about 20 of us to the camping area somewhere in the middle of a state forest. Some parts are state and some parts are privately owned, I think. While kayaking that afternoon, we noticed a helicopter doing flybys, but again, my classmates never suspected anything. A couple of mates and I were the first to leave the water and helped the teacher with some equipment and started building our own rafts. I was standing off to the side when one of the national park guides walked over to one of the instructors and talked in a hushed, slightly stressed out tone. I remember hearing the instructor say stuff like, "You're kidding," and "I don't believe it." He just looked shocked and taken aback. So at this point, I started connecting the dots, but I didn't say anything to my school friends. Around dusk that night, I got to use the toilet block, which is around 100 meters from the main campsite. As I go in, I remember a guy walking around the other side of the block. I didn't see him very clearly in the diminished light, but he kept glancing around with nervous body language. I couldn't see his face clearly. He wasn't part of our party, and to me he just didn't fit. I didn't think much of it at the time though. Fast forward to the next morning when we got back to the car park. The teacher tells us that a body was found in a dam not far from where we were. They didn't want to tell us so as to not frighten us. We later found out that it was a young guy who was killed with an axe, and the guy who did it was related to the serial killer who hunted in the same area. I don't know if that guy I saw had anything at all to do with the murders, but it freaked me out a lot afterwards. I haven't been camping since. This happened to me when I was 17, around the time when most of my friends were just getting their driver's license. We all had that rush for cars back then, so it was quite common for us to skip school and go for a ride out of town. The city where I live is surrounded by forests and 2 mountains, so we basically had a lot of places to go and chill. One day, my friend was very excited to show us a place that he had found about online, and possibly here on Reddit, for which people said was quite odd. We looked it up and apparently it had a reputation for being a paranormal site. Being the typical group of teens, we collectively agreed to check it out ASAP, including me, who more or less believes in spiritual stuff. Going up the mountain, we were listening to the radio until we lost the station to static, which for obvious reasons is what the radio does when you go deep into the woods. This entire experience is happening during a summer night, so we were feeling pretty careless and as excited as a person can be. Having no music to listen to, we started talking and discussing our expectations for this place, with most of us having no expectations at all. Our conversation was suddenly interrupted by the loud static coming from the radio that we had just turned off a few minutes ago. We were all a bit startled, but still nothing out of the ordinary. It happened again a few minutes later. We all looked at the radio and it was still off. We quickly dismissed this as something that radios do for some reason, and again didn't pay much attention. The third time that it happened, the driver hit the brakes and stopped the car. He turned to us and yelled, "Come on, did you hear that? What was that?" Claiming that he had heard a voice this time. None of us heard anything except the static. The driver said that he had had enough and switched the engine off, so there is no possible way for anything including the radio to be working. We all sat there like that for a while in pitch black, for there would be no city lights around us and the forest had covered all other light sources like stars and so on. You couldn't distinguish a night sky, that's how dark it was. The light indicating the radio turned down and soon, the static came again. I could tell that we were all feeling a bit anxious by then. Through the static came a female voice singing, and it was very silent. For a second it got louder and then fell back to silent again and then vanished. But even weirder, the static vanished too. Once we switched the car back on and turned the headlights on too, we observed what seemed to be smudges of fingers all across the windshield. We didn't turn the car around immediately, but I could tell that we all just wanted to leave. We stopped further up on the hill, took some pictures of the Milky Way, and went home afterward. Ever since we speculate about what the heck happened to the radio in the windshield that night. My friends went 2 more times without me to the same place, recording the same, including feeling a small push once the car was off. What do you guys think? I believe there are many logical explanations, but considering the fact that I'm somewhat of a person who believes in such stuff, and I had an adrenaline rush that night, it's hard for me to grasp something rational.